Hi everybody, welcome back to the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we're back and we're still here with Maria Much. She's a local author here telling us about her book. Could you just give us a quick recap of the book so we're all up to speed?
I would say short stories that have a surreal tone to them, and 3 of them are based on fairy tales. Such as Red Riding Hood, there's a Sleeping Beauty version, and the story of Bluebeard, which we were just talking about, and how dark the original tale is. So mine is a contemporary version, and definitely a little on the dark side.
That's perfectly fine, and cool to dig into some lesser known stories. And were you inspired by the fairy tales themselves, or how'd you get the idea for this book?
I started with the Red Riding Hood story, and I read there's a wonderful British author, Angela Carter, and people who are into their fairy tales and literary fiction know Angela Carter very well. She wrote a wonderful collection called In the Company of Wolves, and the title story is her version of Red Riding Hood, and it's absolutely wonderful and lush, and it was really inspiring. So that led me to do a bunch of research. I read some really great background information on the history of Red Riding Hood, and just how the early versions were really baudy and very verging on the pornographic.
Oh.
And yeah, very and French. And
of course, French.
Yeah, of course, right? And so they were just the history is really fascinating. So I started with that one, and that story, I wouldn't say that writing typically just pops out, at least it doesn't for me. It's definitely a process, and sometimes a pretty long one, but that particular story just came out almost whole, and that was the first one. So then I started veering into Bluebeard and Sleeping Beauty, and then started thinking about other types of strangeness and the way that our world is so surreal without, it's just naturally surreal, and our existence here is so fascinating. And so then I started riffing on sort of general stories that were not fairy tale based, but have some surreal aspect to them.
Similar themes.
Yeah, similar themes.
So it's interesting. It seems there's always seems to be a new retelling of these classic stories, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, all of these classic fairy tales we grew up with. There's always a new approach, either through the movies, or I remember when I was younger reading what was called politically correct fairy tales. That was
right. I remember
very,
that, yeah.
very overblown humor point of view for it. And why do you think we keep going back to these classic ancient stories? What do you think keeps drawing us back to retell it?
I think that those stories have an initial drive to them, which is why they've lasted, which is why people told them within their families and in their social circles over and over, and each time they were told, they would change them and add to them and embellish, and of course they change and grow over time. And they're extremely inviting because you can go into some very dark places in a kind of safe way. They also invite humor. They're also interesting because everyone knows the basic stories.
That's true.
So that's part of what's fun about changing people's expectations. So you play with the details, and there's automatically this wonderful opportunity for surprise.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point. And so the title, When We Were Birds, does that come from, you said the first story is talking about a peregrine falcon turned into a woman. Is that where the title comes from?
Birds feature throughout in some sense, or winged creatures, and from the idea of transformation. So there is a story where a winged creature is found on an ocean shore who's believed to be a famous musician. For people who are interested in classical music, it's a riff on Glenn Gould. So he is discovered, or someone who they think is Glenn Gould, with a set of wings. And he's held captive by villagers, and they sort of exploit his fame and try to figure out who he really is. So that's one. There is a story where a baby grows a feather from her neck, and that's actually based on a true incident. There was a baby just a few years ago, I think in Kansas City, if I remember correctly, who sprouted a feather from her neck.
Oh, wow.
And her bewildered parents took her to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician determined that probably the baby had swallowed a feather, and the feather got stuck and emerged through her neck, kind of like a piece of shrapnel, I guess.
That's fascinating.
I loved that story. I thought that was so absolutely intriguing, and so, it would have all kinds of different connotations depending on your belief system,
absolutely,
where you live, etc. So I took that as a launch point for one of the stories, although my version has nothing to do with the actual people that happened to. Yeah.
Great. And so tell us, where can we get this fabulous beach read?
You can. It's published by Simon & Schuster Canada. You can get it anywhere down here in the U.S. from your favorite bookseller. But if you are shopping local, and I hope you are, Wakefield Books in Wakefield has signed copies.
Great, and it's always great to support local businesses, and who doesn't want a signed copy of their favorite summer book? So tell us a little bit about some of your past works.
So this is my first book of fiction, but it's actually my second book. My first one is Know the Night, and it's a memoir, and it focuses on my son, my older son, who has Down syndrome and autism, and went through a period of staying awake at night. It was about a 2-year period where we didn't sleep very much at all.
Oh, wow.
And our world, speaking of the surreal, became very surreal because of that. But that book, I brought into the story to sort of expand on his story. The Antarctic explorer Admiral Richard Byrd, who was down in Antarctica in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. And there was a wonderful book that he wrote called Alone, based on his experience of being in the Antarctic and barely surviving. And I had read that during that period that I was awake with my son, and I just loved it. And it was a book that really made me feel less alone, and so I incorporated his story into the story of my son.
And you can definitely see the parallels there between, feeling like you're by yourself, and down in the Antarctic you get the long periods of darkness and the long periods of light as well. So you can definitely see the parallels there, and it sounds absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
We'll have to check that out. And so what's next for you now that When We Were Birds is available to the public? Are you working on something new?
I am. I'm working on a novel.
Wonderful.
So there's a joke among people who know me that I'm just going to do one of everything. One book of poetry.
There you go. Recipe book.
Right. Exactly.
Textbook.
Hey, you just gave me an idea. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right, well, stay tuned. Maybe there'll be a recipe book down the line a little bit. So do you know what the novel is going to be about yet? Or?
Oh, yes. Actually, the central story in the novel began as one of the stories in When We Were Birds. It's not there anymore. I took it out once you'll hear a lot of people say this who write novels, that often they begin as short stories, and then it just grows and grows, and you realize that the thing that you have is not a short story at all, but something much bigger and more complex. It needs more room. So yes, it started in here, but then got got taken out, and so now it's got its own space.
And would you say it's easier or it's harder to write a novel as opposed to a short story? Because I've heard from friends of mine who are writers that I've heard both. I've heard, writing a novel, it's a little easier. You have more room to flesh out, and short story, you feel kind of constrained. But I've also heard, oh no, short stories are easy. You just write them and then that's that. So
No.
I've heard both.
Yeah, short stories are not easy.
I'm sure.
If there's any short story writers listening, they're going, no, it's not easy. Yeah, there is something uniquely perplexing that can happen with a short story. But I have to say, for me, I'm not really tied down too much to genre, in the sense that it's not that it's all the same exactly, but writing is writing, and you sort of go with the form that arrives.
Variations on a theme.
Right.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Maria. We really appreciated having you. And you can get When We Were Birds anywhere online, or if you want a signed copy, you can head down South County, check out Wakefield Books, and stay tuned for her next novel and recipe book and textbook and music book and whatever comes next after that. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll be right back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, welcome back here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We just had Maria Much with us, a local author, talking about her book. Very interesting. And now we have Jessica Willey. She's here with us. She couldn't be with us today. It's high season out on Block Island. But she's here to talk to us about the Block Island Float Project for 2018. So welcome. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And so tell us, what is the Float Project?
So the Glass Float Project is a public art installation that was created by Evan Horton. And basically, it's a treasure hunt that takes place on Block Island on our beaches and trails. And the glass artist makes these glass floats, they're called, and hides them around the island every season. So This year, 2018, there's 550 that will be hidden throughout the season, and thousands of people come and look, and 550 lucky people go home with them.
And so it's finders keepers. If you come across one, you get to take it home.
That's correct, and we do try to encourage people to register them on the website because they are signed, they're numbered, they're dated, and they have the stamp of Block Island on them. And we ask people to register them so we can sort of keep track of them. Not everybody does, and we also try to keep it to one per seeker. So a lot of people, they find one, they keep looking, they want to keep looking, find more. We ask for the second one, either put it back where they found it or re-hide it somewhere. It's really supposed to be one per seeker per year.
Of course, to keep it fair, we don't want one person combing the island and taking home 50. And in honor of 2018, there are 18 special floats this year?
That's right. So every year, depending on the year, we've been doing this since 2012. So in 2012, there were 12 special colored glass floats, all different, maybe red or blue, or there's some really cool floats that are multicolored. And then in 2018, it's 2018 this year, and usually the float number one has some sort of gold leaf on it. Last year it was cobalt and gold, from what I understand. I never saw it, but it's blue and gold leaf float.
And so your website says you go out and you hide all of them in June. How many have been found so far?
Right. So we used to do them all at once, but we don't do them all at once anymore. So
okay.
They start in June and they go out throughout the season. I would say conservatively about half are out right now, maybe 200 are out on the island.
Okay.
And, about 100 have been registered. That doesn't mean that there's 100 out there. Not everybody registers their floats. So we always guess at any given time, because there's plenty that have never been found that are out there. At any given time, there's probably about 50 somewhere on the island. The last float is definitely all about timing. So if you hit it right, you might see one just sitting in a tree really easily. And if you don't hit it right, you may have to look really hard to find one.
So are they all over the island? Are they kept into one specific area?
Mostly they're on the Greenway trails, our public trail system out here.
Okay.
Or up. And if they are on the beaches, they're above the high tide mark, and they're never up in the dunes. We try to keep people off the dunes and off the bluffs. So we would never, climb up the side of the bluff or climb up the dunes and hide them up in there. They would be in like an old lobster trap that's washed up on the beach, or in a pile of rocks, something like that.
And you guys at the Tourism Council, do you generally plan where you're going to put them, or do you just go out and see what speaks to you?
Right. So Evan is in charge. Evan's a glass artist, and he's really the one who does most of the hiding. He does have some float ferries that go and do hide some of the floats, but it's pretty guarded secret who exactly hides the floats because people get followed.
Oh my! So this is a very intense process then.
Very seriously. So really, I think what happens is we try to see who, maybe if there was a whole bunch that were just found at, say, Hodge property, maybe, that would have been the next place you would go hide them. So it definitely is just what speaks to you as you're hiding them. It has nothing to do with, anything else, but try not to repeat the same places more than once. But there's more than one person hiding, so you never know.
Of course, you gotta shake it up, keep things fun. So that's the fun of the hunt. If you only get one per year, you don't want to just stumble into it.
Exactly.
And
it's
so
exciting. It's very exciting when you find them.
Oh, I'm sure it makes me want to go get a ferry ticket and check it out. And how did you guys come up with this idea for this fabulous scavenger hunt?
Actually, it was Evan's idea, and he had a friend who was a glass blower out in Oregon, and there's a city out there that does a very similar project. And Evan's a big fan of, his studio is in Wakefield, Rhode Island. A big fan of fishing on Block Island, and he used to come out and walk all around the shore of Block Island and fish. And he thought, what a great place to hide some of my glass creations. So he came to the Tourism Council back in 2011 and asked to help with funding, and we thought it was a good idea, and we were 100% behind it. And so ever since, we've helped with funding, and we help, with the website and development and all that, because like all artists, Evan is focused on making the art and not the sort of nitty gritty of the details. So we've worked together for a lot of years, but it's definitely was his baby. It's his ideas, and it's his project. And that's Evan Horton is the artist's name.
Great, and I'm sure that takes so much time for him. 550 float, and he makes them all by himself.
He does. Well, he does have a partner that helps him, and they had an intern actually last summer. And interestingly, her name was Izzy, and she was just learning how to make the floats. So some of her floats were smaller than the traditional floats, and so they got known. The people who come out and search all the time know sort of what's going on, and they were called the Izzy floats, and they were smaller. They were these tiny, really cute little floats, and so the people wanted to find the Izzy floats instead of the colored floats or whatever.
That's so fun.
Them that do it, but really it's mostly Evan, and it does take a lot of time.
Oh, I'm sure. And you said that not all of them are always found, but keeping in mind the ones that aren't necessarily registered with you guys, how many are generally found per year? Is it 80% of them? Is it half?
I would guess that 85 to 90% are found every year. If 80 even up as high as 95%. Yeah, it's really hard to get people to register them, but what if they do, we know. If they don't, then we have no way of knowing, because we can't keep. There's so many people hiding them. We can't keep track of where they all are and go back and check on them or whatnot.
Of course, yeah, hard to keep a master list of something that big.
Exactly.
Great, and so you said you put about half of them out in June, and then do you just keep them going throughout the year, or is it more of, let's say come September, October, okay, here, we're gonna bring out all the rest of them, or do you just slowly put them out throughout the year?
Well, generally it depends on when Evan makes them, when they go out, but this year they were all made before the season started. So the first, say, 50 or 75 went out that first weekend in June. And that's the only time that we publicize that they're going out. They will be out for that first weekend in June. Otherwise, we never say when they're going out. But about 50 a month go out through the season, maybe 100 in July, 100 in August, and in September it steps down again to 50 maybe in September and October. And the majority of them, 90% of the floats are out by the end of October, by Columbus Day. That's really the season. But there are an additional maybe 20 or 30 floats that go out throughout the winter and into the spring, because it doesn't start until June. And so there's still, the daffodil blooms out here. A lot of tourism happens pre-season. So we put some out in the pre-season, but they would be, for example, this year there were 2017 floats being found in 2018.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, great. Well, sounds like a lot of fun. If you're looking for something exciting to do this weekend or spend some time with the kids, you can go to Block Island, check it out. It could be anywhere, probably on the Greenway trails, not in the dunes. Stay off the dunes.
Stay off the dunes. And I do have, I don't know if you can see in your, I've got one, this is a clear one, so you can sort of see what it looks like. And then this is a colored, I don't know if you could see that.
Oh, they're so beautiful.
Yeah, they're absolutely works of art. They're absolutely works of art. So.
And the flat part on the bottom, that's Eben signature.
That's it says Block Island Glass Float Project, and then on the side it would be that's number 345, like, and then 2018. So, yep.
All right, sounds like a lot of fun. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. I know you're very busy. It's like I said, it's high season on the island. So if you're looking for something fun to do this weekend, go check it out. Head out to the island, enjoy the sun. Maybe you'll come home with a new decoration. So thanks so much, Jessica, for joining us today. And we'll be back on at 4. We're going to be talking news and politics, so don't go too far. And here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center, I'm your GoLocal Live host, Rachel Nunes.